Thank you, everyone, and welcome to ANC's panel on talking race and racism in NL. But before we start things off, I will ask one of our panelists, Robert Leamon, to start us off with a land acknowledgement. Robert, take it away.
Walalayeg, thank you, and walalio to all of you for being in this space with us here today and for coming together on these important conversations. As we're moving into the land acknowledgement, which has been the one I'm going to use, has been gifted to our community by First Light, welcome folks into a bit of a gentler space to take a moment to get comfortable, maybe light a smudge as I did to sort of ease into the space, and do whatever feels right to you to help take a moment to feel fully present in your body and in the land and your relations to it. And for me, that often presents as just taking a deep breath in and a nice slow exhale, which if that works for you, I invite you to do it as well. And the intent with that is that we're trying to, again, connect with how we're feeling, the different energies and experiences that we're all bringing into this space together, and the histories and the relations that each of us carry with this land and its peoples. And this grounding is especially important as we aim to be fully present in mindfully and respectfully acknowledging the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beatuk, whose culture has now been erased forever. We acknowledge the island of Acknowledgement, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beatuk and Mi'kmaq peoples, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatukavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. And as peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all. And I hope that that's an acknowledgement that we can all carry with us in our daily lives, not one that only is limited to this space or to these checkbox acknowledgements, because I know that we have to be very intentional about what it is we're acknowledging and why in all of our relations. And to Nogma.
So, hi everybody, my name is Barb Walsh and I'm the manager for RAP and Settlement Services at the Association for New Canadians. We know that Canada is a land of opportunity and safe haven for migrants around the globe, many of which serve at the ANC. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians pride themselves on kindness, which is certainly true. However, this misleads a lot of people into believing and thinking that racism does not exist in NL. It does. And just last week, there was a racist letter that was sent to the MUN's Black Students Association. And that's just one of the most recent incidents that we've witnessed. So today we're going to take a closer look at the impact of racism in our province and how to move forward as a truly diverse and inclusive society. So today's event is in recognition of the UN's Day to Eliminate Racial Discrimination, which was last Sunday, March 21st. This month is also the province of Newfoundland and Labrador's Multicultural Month. So before we start, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. So thank you for all of those that have muted your mics and turned off your video. You can also set your Zoom to speaker view as it may be better for viewing. And if you have any questions for the panelists, please please put them, in the chat box and we will address them at the end. Unless your question is for Sean, because we don't know how long we have him here because, you know, he's minding the little baby and he might have to run away from us soon. So we're just happy that he can grace us with his presence. So we'll do that. We have a wonderful panel of speakers with diverse perspectives to share their stories and speak from lived experiences. So without further ado, we will start off by asking the panelists to introduce themselves first, and then we will start with the first questions afterwards. So I would ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll go with Sean first. Can you please introduce yourself, even though I think everybody knows who Sean is? I'm bigging him up big time today, but everybody should know who he is. But Sean, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Majumder, and I am a resident, part-time resident of Burlington, Newfoundland. And I was raised in that small community, and my father was of South Asian descent, Indian, East Indian, and then my mother was from Rattling Brook, Newfoundland, and I am the beige offspring of said two parents. And I'm excited to be here today to share some of my experience.
Thank you, Sean. Next, we have David Wong from Quidi Vidi Brewery. David?
Barbara. Hi, audience. One small correction. My last name is Fong.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, by way of background, my family's been here a long time, longer than an awful lot of other Newfoundlanders. We've been here since 1895. And of course, we all know Chinese names are terribly hard to pronounce. So when my forefathers came here, they adopted Anglo first names. So my great-great-grandfather came here around the 1920 time frame, and he took the name Charlie. And then my grandfather, whom I'm named after, he took the name Davy. So I'm called David, and some people call me Davy, my mother in particular. And then my father, Hayford, and of course me. So I'm generation number 4. I was born here. Newfoundland up until 1949 was a British colony, as all of us know. And at that time, there was Chinese women were not permitted in the colony, only male Chinese. So up until 1949, there were only male Chinese here. And I think maybe the population was around 200 or 300. When Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949, that law was repealed and adopted the Canadian law. My mother came here in 1950, and I was born in 51. And I have 3 children. My wife Paulette's from Newfoundland, and so they're generation number 5. And we have a granddaughter and year-old, and she is now generation number 6. So we've got long roots there, and it's anyway. I'll talk a little bit more later about my experiences.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Sarojini.
My name is Sarojini Ramnarine-Lang, Ramnarine being my maiden name. I'm originally from Guyana, South America, the former British Guyana. For those of you who are trying to figure out where it is, Guyana is the only English-speaking country in South America, and it's in the northwest part. Brazil and Venezuela borders Guyana. So known fact, they're all fighting for oil right now. So Guyana is in demand as we speak, the oil has been discovered in Guyanese waters. Anyhow, moving on, my family escaped political and economic tensions in the very late 70s, early 80s to come to Canada for a better life, land of milk and honey. I'm from a family of 7 kids. I'm right smack in the middle, number 4. So as all good parents, our parents wanted to have their children go to a country where education will be better, where it will be freer, and where we don't have to worry day and night about crime and the tensions that were only escalating at the time. So my journey began in Toronto. Then I went to the great west of the province of the land of the living skies, Saskatchewan. We lived there for 6 years, went to university, enjoyed life, really tried to get settled in Canada. Lots of challenges, I remember asking my dad back in Guyana, where is Saskatchewan? Is it close to Toronto? My dad said, somewhat. So, we didn't know much about Canada at the time. Everything was the main ports, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver at the time. So I did my education. My family, a lot of them stayed and made lives for themselves. We got married. My husband and I came to Toronto, continued our education. We have 2 very beautiful kids now. I loved business and economics. I studied that. I worked in finance for almost 35 years, but I always love the arts. I love entertainment. It's always been a passion. When you come from the Caribbean, you gotta love music, art, and dance, you know? So, yeah.
Yes,
So
I
here
know
I
what you're
am.
talking about.
My life finances behind me. I saw the need for more Caribbean culture and music and flair in Newfoundland. So, an idea I had floating around for years in my head, I created Caribbean Connections. It's a radio program on the campus and community radio station, CHMR. Thank you all, the ANC, for having me on the panel with these awesome folks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Up next, we have Dr., and forgive me for the pronunciation, Ayse Akinturk. Welcome, Dr. Akinturk.
Thank you very much, Barbara. You did great. It was the proper pronunciation. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ayse Akinturk, and I'm originally from the Turkish city of Istanbul, where I spent most of my life working and studying. And then for graduate studies, I came to Canada about 20 years ago. I did my PhD in political science at the University of Carleton. After spending a couple of years there, I moved here because my husband got a job here. So we settled down here as a family. I'm the mother of a 13 years old son, and I'm a community volunteer involved in the boards of various community organizations, including the Muslim Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, St. John's Local Immigration Partnership, Happy City St. John's, and also Addressing Islamophobia in NL project. Currently, I'm working as a postdoctoral fellow at Mann Department of Religious Studies, co-leading a project called Muslim Narratives and Lives in Newfoundland and Labrador. My research interests and community work, volunteering work, focus on anti-racism, immigration, welcoming communities, and building inclusive programs and organizations. So I'm very much looking forward to learn from all these great panel and share my experiences as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, Robert Lehmann.
Way again, Deluisi Lobeld. Hi, my name is Robert Leamon. My pronouns are he and him, and I am a Mi'kmaq land protector. That is not a title that I came to easily. It's been quite the long journey because I grew up thinking I was a little white kid from a little white town and learned I was wrong on both counts. What I have since learned is that I'm actually a Mi'kmaq, and I think back to the ways that we were displaced from our culture and family and traditions as to why it was a couple of decades into life that I was actually coming to this to this place that I'm in now. And that was, again, not an easy struggle. I first found out about it through the beginning of the Halpu Nation and throughout more than 10 plus years as an activist, just trying to figure out my way through helping through these struggles, seeing so many people in my communities having similar struggles, and also not really knowing where I needed to go, what I needed to do to try to reclaim this sense of to reclaim a whole sense of identity from the way that it had been fractured by the intergenerational trauma of colonialism. So I'm so deeply grateful to be here with you all. My name fully is Robert Charles Victor Leamon, and I present it that way because Charles and Victor are my grandfathers, and I carry them with me as part of my relations in my way of engaging with the world. Similar with my grandmothers, Agnes and Emma, and our families, the Breaks and the Langdowns and the Lehmans, and I'm deeply humbled and filled with so much love that my parents are here, Sean and Linda Leamon, and just the deep amount of love and courage that it took to get us to this point, to survive the generations that got us here. And I also have one sibling, and she actually lives across the pond over in France, so I don't get to see her as often, but we do try to keep connected. And we also are, again, blessed to have a nibbling niece, nephew, or baby Blakes on the way. There's my sister. I'm going to be a funkle from across the pond, and I'm so excited and trying to find ways to help baby Blake still find connection to culture and family and community and to our Mi'kmaq nationhood, because I know what it's like to have lost it, and I'm not going to lose it again for them.
Robert, I just want to touch on this since you mentioned it. You said that your entire life, pretty much, you were raised believing that you were, a white person. What happened, and when did you realize that your Indigenous heritage?
Yeah, so we didn't talk about it as a family for the first, 15, 20 years of my life. It was only around that sort of 2008, 9-ish mark that we started talking about it, after I'd already had a couple of decades. And the reason for that is, again, colonialism, intergenerational trauma. We didn't feel safe to be able to actually be loudly and proudly Mi'kmaq, because it had been so forcibly stripped from us through violence, through racism, through so many systems of oppression that continue to this day, that are not only historical artifacts, that continue to have ongoing impacts and ongoing actions of colonialism today. So being presenting as like a white passing person, I first wrestled with a question around the age of 20, when the Halafu Mi'kmaq First Nation band was being formed. And yeah, that was what really sort of sparked that conversation in a way that hadn't been done before, because there's been so many decades of us as Mi'kmaq people fighting for recognition, fighting for validation in our identity, because of how many times it had been stripped from us. So yeah, that's how I first really came to engage with that question.
Thanks, Robert. I will start with Sean. Sean, growing up here in Newfoundland and Labrador, what was that like for you, having the heritage and the background that you have? What was that like for you growing up here?
Well, similar to Robert, I truly had no idea. See, I was raised with my white mom and my beige sister in a small trailer. My parents split when I was a baby, so I was in this town of 365 white people. And then there was me, beige, but I had no idea. I had no idea that I was brown or I was anything different. And, my experience was interesting because, in small town Newfoundland, at least in that part of Newfoundland, there wasn't racism, but there was curiosity, especially for me, because everybody was like, I don't get it. Your mom is white. You're a little off white. You're not exactly, you don't fit right into a category. And I couldn't answer when they'd say, why are you beige? And I had no idea. I just knew my dad was in Toronto and he was dark skinned, but I didn't know. And my mom, I remember telling me about, he's Indian. And I remember, this is not something I'm proud of, but I went to a show and tell one time. I'll never forget. It was Mrs. Roberts. She was my teacher. And I brought in my story, and I brought in full, I told everybody my dad was a chief, an Indian chief. I felt so bad. I still today feel horrible about it. I didn't know what I was talking about because I didn't know. I had no idea. In fact, I thought I was white like everybody else. And I kind of became a little bit racist a little bit, because there were other kids who would, because you want to hang out with cool kids. And one of my best friends in small town Newfoundland, when we moved from, we actually moved from Burlington to Bay Verte, which is the bigger, huge town of 5,000 people nearby. And I became really good friends with the only Chinese kid in town. So it was me, the Chinese kid, Jason, and then there was my white best friend, Jamie, and the three of us were like little gangbusters running around. But that was, it was such a unique, interesting experience. But it was still, nobody was ever, there wasn't like hate. It's a different concept. There's curiosity, people who are different. They want to know why, like kids. I'm talking about in my peer group, as a young kid. Adults, there might've been racist adults I didn't know, but even I remember people saying to me things like, there was people in Newfoundland, they're not racist. even if they say racist things, most of the times, other than recent experiences at MUN or whatever, but people who generally in small town, even when they say racist things, it's still coming from a place of love. I had this happen to me where this woman was describing growing up with me and my sister, and this was for a TV show. And she said, "Oh my God, we love Sean and Ronnie growing up. They were like so cute." And I'll never forget, I'd see them in the back of the bus, and there they were, like two little burnt babies. Oh my God, we loved them. Now, this is coming from a place of love. But you say that anywhere else, that is the most hateful on, from a perspective, burnt babies. I mean, but she was loving and sweet, and it was with humor, and it was such an interesting thing when I heard her say it. I did not feel like I wanted to cause a riot or burn down a store. I just was like, it was very, very insightful to me. So my experience was a very positive one, very, very positive. And I'll stop by saying this, being beige in an all white town, I learned to find acceptance and identity in that. And it was only when I moved to Mississauga where I was beige in an incredibly diverse town that blew my mind. And that's when I started experiencing more racism. I didn't experience it in small town Newfoundland. I experienced it more when I went to, because brown isn't just brown. Like in Newfoundland, brown is brown. But in Ontario, as you know, Barb, and as you know, Sarojini, by the way, Sarojini, that is the name of my my grandmother, Sarojini. Majumdar.
That's why you got the pronunciation on the first try. I'm like, okay, Sarojini, I've been practicing with Renata, but you got it just like that. Okay, grandmother. Yes. So this is good.
So anyway, that is that's kind of my experience with small town Newfoundland. Yeah.
So Sean, so when you started your career as a comedian, as an actor, it was not in Newfoundland. It was in it was in Mississauga.
Well, what happened was, I mean, you're born in Newfoundland, you're raised in Newfoundland, you're a natural performer. You just are. You're surrounded by it. Humor. Everybody there loves telling stories. So I was kind of trained there, and we did Christmas concerts, and I performed a lot on stage and in small town Newfoundland, and then, in theater in high school there, and then to Ontario, where I decided to do it for real. You know what I mean? And I realized there was a whole career out there that kind of could be explored.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Next, I'm going to go to David Fong. David, I got it right this time. David is the owner operator of Quidi, Vidi Brewery. David, your family immigrated to Canada from China in the 1800s. You were born and raised in NL. Can you share what your experience with racism has been like over the past years in NL? Can you share that with us?
Certainly. I'd like to break it up kind of in decades. We moved to Carbonear when I was around 3 years old, so let's say the 50s. But during the first few years, probably up to age 7 or 8, I mean, I didn't, you're only a child, you don't pay much attention, and I don't remember a whole lot from that era. But it was when I was around probably age 10 onwards, 10 to say age 14, 15, that I started to get the racial taunts and bullying and what have you. And but actually, it was really interesting. There were more racist comments coming from adults than there were from kids that I was going to school with. And we all heard that saying that when a child is born, they're not racist. They learn that as a learned behavior. Mm-hmm. And I really think that kids learn a lot of this at home. They hear it from their parents. Their parents probably don't say it publicly, but that's where they hear it, or maybe they hear it from some of their friends. So during that time period, there were times that it was weekly that I'd get bullied with a racial taunt, and I'd see stuff written on the concrete and what have you. And but what was really troubling was when racist comments come at you from kids, it's easier to take than when it comes from adults. And there are certain adults that to this day, I'm sure they don't say such nasty things anymore, but those memories never leave me. I mean, I know exactly who these people are and what they said at that point in time. And it's hard to take when you're young. But when I came to Memorial in 1969 and started, university, it was a totally different experience. In fact, I can't remember one incident at Memorial that was racist in nature. And then when I graduated in '78, Paulette and I, my wife, we weren't married at that time. We moved to Calgary, work in the oil industry. And I started working on a drilling rig in southern Alberta in Brooks. And I remember one day coming off a hitch, we had done nights, and where do you go? We went to the tavern for a beer. And I would have been around 25 years of age at that time. And my hair was long, and I had it tied back with a rawhide band. And I didn't always wear my glasses at the time. Anyway, I remember walking to a tavern with a friend of mine, and he went up to get a tray of draft beer, because believe it or not, back in those days, you could buy a tray of draft beer for 20 cents a glass.
Wow.
Yes. Anyhow, and a friend came back, he said, Fong, he said, problem. I said, how's that? He said, they'll serve me, but they don't serve Indians here. And I was absolutely floored that here we are this is not that long ago. And there was that attitude towards, indigenous peoples. So that really woke me. I've never forgotten that story. And then I'd worked while I was in Calgary. We were there 7 years. And I worked for one of the major oil companies in Canada. And I started out in the drilling department. And I remember within a couple of years, I was promoted to an area engineer. So I was looking after all the drilling rigs in northeastern British Columbia. And there were 4 engineering supervisors reporting to the chief engineer. And I can remember one day just before lunch, we were deciding to go, and somebody suggested that we go to Chinatown for Chinese food. And I remember to this day my supervisor making an extremely racist comment. And I'm floored. I'm here. I work for this guy. And he makes this really crude racist comment about Chinese people. And I'm sitting there. Jesus, I'm Chinese visibly. I'm Chinese, and I'm working for this guy, and I'm just absolutely floored. And then what was really confusing, and I've never been able to figure this out to this day. He was originally from the UK. He was working here as an expat, and within a couple of years, he moved back to the UK, and I got promoted in his position. Now, and I know that he had something to do with me getting that promotion. So on the one hand, he makes this really rude, racist comment, but then he subsequently, I'm sure he made a recommendation that I take over his position. So I've never been able to figure that one out. And then I also had another incident during that time period. We used to go to Vancouver quite a bit. Paulette and I had a nice sailboat, and we'd go out there and do a lot of sailing around the Gulf Islands. And we met this couple one time on Savory Island. And they were slightly older than us and had a young family. The kids were 2 or 3 at the time. And we became quite good friends with them, because we had a lot of things in common, sailing, and also they were quite keen skiers, and they were skiers. And I remember one time visiting with these folks, and he was driving me through West Vancouver, where they lived, and we went to an area called British Properties, which at that time was a very exclusive area, and it still is today, very expensive real estate. And he made a comment to me while we're driving around his Volvo that, he said, we call this Chopsticks Hill because of all the Asians that were living there. And of course, the perception in Vancouver is that the real estate in Vancouver has been driven through the ceiling by, people that have immigrated from Hong Kong or where have you. And so I just thought that was really odd. And I don't think this person is racist. I think it's akin to the comment that Sean made just a little earlier. He made this comment, and I don't think deep down inside that this person is racist, but it's just that little sensitivity. You open your mouth and you say stuff that, is not acceptable. And it wasn't acceptable then, and it's not acceptable now. And so I have no idea to this day why this person would have made such a freaking comment when you're sitting in a car with someone who's clearly Asian. Right now, let's fast forward, man. I have a lot of little anecdotes, but the one that really sits out more than anything, and all the experience in the 69 years I've been on this earth, happened to me last year in August. And as the audience know, that I'm founder of Quidi Vidi Brewery, and and the brewery's been in this village for 25 years. It's an institution in this village. And we've been living here now for 6 years in a home just across the street from the brewery. Well, last year at the end of August,
I think I remember that. I saw the incident that took place on TV. Could you share that with us?
I did, yes, on NTV. Normally from time to time I get a lot of times racism in this province is kind of very discreet. It's kind of like an undertone. And normally I would not make an issue, but what happened to me last year in August and to my family was such a magnitude that I had to get the story out there. Now, this is not a comment that somebody made to me on a street corner or in a supermarket that lasted, say, 5 seconds. This went on for 1 hour, over an hour, probably an hour and a half at 10 p.m. at night and didn't stop till about 11:30. And this woman who lives in the village next door to her, I'll not name her today, but her name is on Facebook and she's been charged. But around 10 p.m. and this went on in our driveway, and she actually came up and rang our doorbell, not once. I told her to go home because she clearly had intoxicated, and 4 times. And finally, it got to the point where my daughter and her boyfriend are living in a house just next to us, had to call the RNC, and they came. But she stood in the driveway for over an hour and, called me a piece of shit, entitled, so-and-so. And then she went over to top when she told me to F off and go back to where I came from. And no choice. Anyway, she was subsequently charged. When the RNC arrived, they didn't have the lights going or the siren. So she was standing shouting at us in the driveway. I remember the RNC guy came up. He says, "Mrs., why are you doing this? Why are you shouting at these people?" And so anyway, they took her and they put her back at the squad car. And then the other officer came up to the house. And he gave me the 2 options. I could let it go, or I could have her charged. And I thought, what the hell am I going to charge her for? I mean, she made a racist comment. I mean, lots of people make racist comments and they're never charged. But apparently, it fitted into the cap because it went on so long, and it was, over an hour of this. And they witnessed it, that she was charged with criminal harassment and mischief. And she went to court. She had a lawyer. And what I found really odd was during this whole process, she hasn't been sentenced yet. It's been put off 4 times now because of COVID-19. But the Crown prosecutor called me and said that her lawyer had called and wanted to know if I would drop one of the charges, criminal harassment. And I said, really, why would I want to do that? They said, well, we'll have to prove the case, so, she might not be found guilty. I said, what do you, and I asked the Crown prosecutor, we're talking on the phone. I said, really? I said, you have 2 videos that I put on a memory stick that are 5 minutes and 3 minutes duration each. And you can hear what she's saying. You can hear her clearly telling me to F off and go back to where I come from and call me a piece of shit, entitled asshole, and, on and on. And it was unreal. I mean, you can't make this up. I mean, you really got to try hard to make a conversation, a rant, a hatred, pure hatred, venom for over an hour.
Yeah, I remember hearing that last year when I was watching it. While I have you on now, David, I was wondering with this sort of movement that's going on in regards to the Asian community and the hate crimes that are being faced now, with regards to being discriminated against with COVID, and what we've seen happen in the U.S. and the shootings about a week or so ago. Can you shed anything how this is impacting you? How this is impacting perhaps the Asian community?
Well, since August last year, not a day goes by that I don't think about it. And when I see all the, I watch, CBC National, and you see all the incidents, especially in British Columbia and Ontario. And of course, it kind of makes sense because that's where you find the big, large Asian populations. Here in Newfoundland, we have a very small Asian population. But my concern is that, the population is going to grow, not only Asian, but, brown skin, Black people. And unless we nip it in the butt, it has potential to go in the wrong direction. But I think the single biggest contributor to all this in 2020, in my opinion, is what's happened down south of the border. Because in order to to eliminate. I don't think we'll ever eliminate racism, but I think we can have it where it's tolerable and it's, reduced. I don't have the right word for it. But when you have, and this has to come from adults and from the leadership of the countries. I mean, when you have Donald Trump making reference to the Chinese flu or the Kung flu, whatever you want to call it, just think about the message that sends. It is deplorable coming from the leader of the free world. That's awful.
Yes, and I think we pretty much all agree on that front, that a lot of this hate and originated with the former U.S. president. Yes. And his remarks. Okay, I'm going to come back to you again, David. Now I'm going to move on to Dr. Ayse Akinturk. You're a Muslim Canadian woman and scholar. You're with MANEL, the Muslim Association of NL. Your delegation spoke to the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Canadian Heritage. Can you share some of the prominent barriers facing Muslim people in NL today?
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, again.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ayse. Just one sec. I wanted to say thank you to Sean. I know he had to run. So in case he's out there, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time out to be with us today. We look forward to hearing from you again. Sorry, Doctor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you to the ANC for taking the time to organize this timely and important conversation, and for everyone on board for joining us this afternoon, in this lovely sunny afternoon. Before I begin talking about, prominent barriers faced by Muslims in Newfoundland and in Canada at large, I would like to first briefly provide some conceptual framing about racism and racial discrimination, because they're among the major barriers that as Muslims we are facing pretty much everywhere. As you know, racism is broadly defined as the belief that a specific race has inherent superiority to others. And racial discrimination is a translation of such belief into concrete actions and decisions that are treating people of certain races badly and unjustly. As far as Muslims are concerned, I think our experience with racism is nuanced and varied. We are subject to multiple forms of it. First, by virtue of being a racially diverse faith community, brown, black, Chinese, and so on, we are often at the receiving end of racism, especially when we live as a religious minority in a white-dominant society. We are also subject to what I call Islamophobia, which is an alarmingly pervasive strain of racism. And I understand Islamophobia as a fear and or hatred of Islam and Muslims that translates into everyday individual, ideological, systemic, and intersectional forms of racism. And accordingly, Muslims are categorically perceived as one single race that is inferior, uncivilized, and deserving hostile treatment. And we know from experience that sadly, Islamophobia can also target non-Muslims, non-Muslim racialized folks, as they are wrongly perceived as Muslims, either due to their skin color or their non-Western attires. As far as I'm concerned, I have to admit that I became conscious of Islamophobia more about 10 years ago when I started wearing the Islamic headscarf. Prior to that, I wasn't. And this personal decision in my spiritual journey brought more visibility to my Muslim identity. It immediately changed the way I was perceived and treated by white non-Muslim folks around, ranging from my neighbors to complete strangers in the public space. And sadly, even my son got affected in this process. Having a visible Muslim mother made his identification as a Muslim kid much easier. So he experienced religious bullying, especially from neighboring kids. And these are personal experiences that are not so easy to talk about, so I won't go into too much of their details. And we know that Islamophobia can unfortunately turn very violent, even in the societies that are deemed to be very peaceful and civilized. And as Canadian Muslims and Canadians at large, we learned this bitter truth on January 29, 2017, when a white supremacist gunman attacked a mosque in Quebec, killing 6 Muslims while they were praying peacefully inside. And our friends in New Zealand, again, learned this bitter truth in March 2019, when another white supremacist gunman killed 51 Muslims while they were still praying in a mosque. So what happened in Quebec 4 years ago now, left us with an everlasting trauma. But it also served as a wake-up call, especially for politicians, for those who were in denial of racism or in denial of Islamophobia in Canada, and for those who were carelessly spreading hateful political rhetoric against immigrants, against racialized folks. So this was the background when the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage began a study to reduce systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada. And our Muslim Association of Newfoundland and Labrador was also invited to contribute to this study by attending a hearing at the House of Commons. So we presented our recommendations, which mainly highlighted the importance of responding with systemic solutions to this systemic problem. We stressed the importance of developing these solutions together with grassroots community organizations that would bring in the voices and perspectives of racialized folks. This is very important because such alliances are key for developing anti-racist training programs and policies that are much needed in various sectors such as the media, education, health, social work, and law enforcement. We also asked for the creation of programs to support victims of Islamophobia and to protect vulnerable ones who are yet to experience, because the trauma that you go through is really overwhelming. And in the absence of proper support mechanisms, you get through a vicious circle of being re-traumatized over and over again. And we also recommended the implementation of appropriate tools that would promote equity and inclusion and eliminate racial and religious barriers to employment. Because it's only when people feel socially and economically empowered, only then they can build this self-esteem and resilience capacity to stand against racism and even report them as hate crimes. Otherwise, hate crimes go unreported. So this is why one of the reasons why we believe that the statistics about hate crimes out there don't really reflect the real picture. We know that racial discrimination plays a major role in Canadian Muslims' poor employment and poverty outcomes. According to Stat Canada, Canadian Muslims are much younger, more educated, urban, and fluent in official languages. Yet they significantly lag behind in economic and political terms. For instance, we have the highest unemployment rate by religious group. And this is especially the case for Muslim women. And those of us who identify their background as Arab have an unemployment rate that is 144% higher than non-racialized women. Also, Muslims' median income is much lower than all Canadians, including all visible minorities. And there is an interesting study that has been done back in 2007. And according to that, Canada has the largest gap between Muslim and non-Muslim poverty rates in comparison with US, France, Germany, Spain, and Britain. So it was a shocking data to find out that we lag even behind these 5 other countries. And academic research and anecdotal evidence show that Muslim and other racialized job seekers with ethnically different names on their resumes, they have a significantly lower chance to be called for an interview. And this is the case even if they have very great Canadian credentials. But when the name they use on their resumes change to white Christian sounding names, they immediately start getting calls from employers. And unfortunately, I also notice a similar challenge for our school-aged Muslim children and youth. And their teachers and peers often do not make conscious effort to correctly pronounce and appreciate their names. And this sometimes make our children and youth feel embarrassed of their own identity. So as you said in your opening remarks, yes, Newfoundland has a well-deserved reputation for being kind and hospitable. Yet, being a white and Christian dominant society, it has its own dominant perceptions of race and religion. So it will be really naive to assume that racism doesn't exist in our province. It is at the core of casual remarks made in private or public encounters. It is at the core of the entire system that is still very much shaped by the colonial settler mindset. And I remember even in the aftermath of the Quebec mosque shooting, there were Islamophobic posters, racist posters put up at MUN campus. And more recently, we were shocked to find out that a medical resident at MUN was proudly self-identifying as an Islamophobe. And of course, we know that social media has no shortage of anti-Muslim posts by those who identify themselves as true Newfoundlanders. So like all other racialized folks, Newfoundland Muslims also face a wide range of systemic barriers as they try to study, work, and live. But I guess this Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism, the pervasiveness and the violence of it brings us unique challenges.
Thank you so much. Oh, Robert, an unknowing person might make judgments based on your appearance and not recognize your Indigenous heritage. Can you share what it means to be white passing and how this has been a unique experience for you?
Absolutely. So being white passing, just to unpack that definition for folks, just to ensure everybody's on the same page in this conversation, is that white passing is when someone perceives a BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous people of color, as a white person for whatever reason that might be. And as we've already started to talk about, this can be things like changing the way we speak, so we sound whiter than we are, switching how we present our names so that we read as whiter than we are, or in my case, switching the way I dress and act to look whiter than I am, or to have to consciously be thinking about how visibly Indigenous am I being in this space, and how likely is that to set me up for harm, or what is that what is that going to be? And so I guess white passing is often used as a defense against the racism that we encounter in nearly every moment of our daily lives, because whiteness is a measure by which racists and colonizers measure how much respect or harm to offer those around them. And that, coming from this idea of this place of being a person who, when people see me, when I'm not visibly presenting as Indigenous, and people see me as white, that's how I'm often immediately read. And that is, again, how I saw myself for a very long time, 20-ish years in. And, I'm only, approaching 30 now, and still I wrestle with this every single day, every waking moment. And especially as I enter into spaces like these, am I coming across as too performative? Am I coming across as is there something that I'm going to say wrong that is going to be illegitimate? That is somehow going to end up with me being stripped of my identity again. That somehow I'm going to break some sort of rule that I don't even know about, or that the settler state continues to try to enforce, and that I'm going to lose that, or I'm going to lose what little access to culture and community that I have. Because especially in my early days, as I was first understanding this question, I remember being presented with the idea that I could just choose. I could just be white and take all the privileges and whatever else, and I could just forget that I was ever Indigenous, and I could just move on with my life. And that has sat with me since that time. And that is important, because there are so many people who do not have that choice, who do not have that opportunity to be able to remove themselves from that racism that they experience in the way that they visibly present in the world. And because of that, that is what a big part of what ultimately drove me to want to try to understand my conflicting identity in a deeper way. And again, it's been a long journey. My first few years, I didn't feel welcome even going to my fellow Indigenous peoples, to my relations, to say, hey, I'm here, I'm Mi'kmaq, I want to help. I didn't even know how to say Mi'kmaq, or what that word was in the beginning. And I remember being afraid to actually go and talk with folks, because I was worried that they were going to see me as a pretendian, as someone who was a white person who was colonizing their space again. But I'm so grateful to all the elders and community connections who have helped me feel welcome and embraced rather than let go. So, and I know that I speak to that because I know that so many people in our province are struggling with that as well. There are so many Mi'kmaq and Beothuk, and all of those histories of our Indigenous experiences where we're white passing, where we're constantly measured as to how valid our Indigenous identity is. When I go into a space, when I have to try to tell someone that I'm Indigenous, I often find myself trying to like get my traumas in a list so that I'm ready to go, depending on how racist they are. How deep into my trauma do I have to go to prove that I am who I am and that I have my relations as Mi'kmaq and Ilnu. And one way that this like plays out in practice is I was starting a new job several years ago, a while back, and actually, was trying to get to know my new coworkers and was talking about what plans we might have for the summer. And I was talking about, well, I might like to go to the powwow in Meowpagek. That seems like it would be a really, that'd be great, really rewarding. And what she said was, oh, I've always wanted to meet a real life Indian. To which I said, hi, I'm Robert. Nice to meet you. But she then was saying, no, I meant with the headdress and with all the other, and then she kind of stopped halfway through a sentence because it was only that she got that far in that she realized that there might be a problem that she was saying with what she was saying. And then I, again, felt like I had to prove my indigeneity and to have to take that emotional baggage of trying to manage this work relationship in a way that was not going to cause further harm, and that I was still able to access these to what I was trying to do. And we don't also, when we think of white passing folks, think of what it is in a historical context. We think of that it's far enough in the past that it's not an issue anymore, or we think of that we've been so far removed that we can just put it in the past and move on. But that is not the case. And in fact, I remind us that we have, as a Mi'kmaq nation, have never surrendered or ceded our rights to this territory and are as such still a sovereign nation. And that's why it's incredibly important for each of us, white passing or otherwise, to be part of this fight, to reassert that nationhood and sovereignty as a Mi'kmaq nation, because that's the only way that we're going to actually get back to a fuller sense of self and identity and how we understand that to be our relations and our nationhood, not only ourselves, and not only the rights that we carry as individuals, but the corresponding responsibilities that we have to everyone else around us to ensure that their rights are upheld as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Robert. And Sarojini, similar to Canada, your home country of Guyana is a former British colony and a member of the Commonwealth. How do you see the historical context shaping your experience with race?
Well, I'll start off by saying, welcome to Guyana, land of many waters. Guyana is an indigenous word, Amerindians, as they're called back in Guyana. It's the only English-speaking South country on the continents of South America, and it's the Caribbean southernmost state, surrounded by three neighbors: Spanish-speaking Venezuela, Portuguese-speaking Brazil, and Dutch-speaking Suriname, or there's French, Dutch, and British Guyana. Of course, I'm from British, as you mentioned. Guyana provides most people feel their link to the English-speaking world. It has the single largest waterfall in the world, and it's the largest unexplored and untouched rainforest, which comprises over 3/4 of the country's 83,000 square miles. The country's population is 783,000 people, and the literacy rate is 98%. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm rattling off these facts. And I did that for two reasons. Many people may have heard about Guyana, but they don't know too much about Guyana. Guyana's racial background, if I can say that, we have Chinese, Portuguese, Indians, Blacks, Indigenous, and other. So really 6 main races, as we like to say. And also for religion, because of the composition, we have mostly Christians, 50%, Hindus, 35, Muslim, 10, and other 5%. The languages are Amerindian dialects, Creole, Hindi, and Urdu. Now, one looking at these stats might see someone coming from Guyana and think, wow, you're certainly exposed to a lot. And it is true. Growing up in our classrooms, we had a mix of the various racial groups in our classrooms. So at a very young age, we learned how to deal with folks from different cultural backgrounds. Now, not to say that all was well and good and we didn't have our problems and all of that. We had to learn also how to come together, how to get along well, because you have, say, Indians coming from the rural parts of Guyana, and you have Indians from the city centers. And as you get older, you realize there is a distinct difference. And in my opinion, I feel everything is about race, not only from my beginnings in Guyana, but also living in Canada for several decades. My family and I mentioned earlier, came here many years ago. But race is at the core of everything. Let's look back the last year. Healthcare, jobs, climate change, the media, coronavirus. So when we say racism, you might get a group of people here, they think, oh, that doesn't affect me, and they stop listening. So, we want to know how many people really care about racial inequality, white or non-white people. And then I ask myself, what has happened to us that we've become so numb to this concept of race and racism? And growing up in Guyana, I was born during the era of British colonialization. We became independent in 1966. So I saw the British overseer in Guyana. They were in charge of the sugar plantations. You had brown and black people working under them as their subordinates or supervisors or next in line. We had white pastors and missionaries from Canada and the United States. So we saw this divide as a child growing up, what the white people do, what the brown people do, what the blacks, the Asians, the Portuguese, and so on. For instance, in Guyana, most of the blacks were in politics and in education, like teaching at high schools and at the university levels. You had the Indians due to history from the Brits bringing the Indians as indentured laborers. They were into business, law, and also medicine, as well as the Asians and some Portuguese. And in the music and the arts, you had some Portuguese, blacks, and indigenous. So growing up, we saw the different racial groups of peoples, and in the areas in which they were well versed in, or they were, I should say, performing better at. So in my teens, I began to see this a lot clearer. Nobody taught it to you in school. We went to school with folks from the Black community, Indian community, Asian, Portuguese, indigenous, as well as what we say other, like say the maybe Spanish from the countries from Venezuela, or some Portuguese from Brazil, or Canadians and Americans. So we saw a lot of changes in our lives as we got older. For instance, we learned to decipher for who will become the doctor, who will become the lawyer, who will be going into business, who will be singing or dancing or going into acting, because a lot of it was based on your background, and as hard as it is for me to say that, when I came to Canada, I felt, oh my gosh, I'm in the land of milk and honey. I can achieve anything. But we learned the hard way. And I just want to bring I know I don't have a lot of minutes left here, but I just want to bring a fact here by one of the economics prophet Mun, Dr. Tony Fang. I don't want it to sound like I'm stealing his research, but here in Newfoundland, and I'll just bring it to here, we have a shrinking population and a shrinking labor force. I would like all of us to ask ourselves, how are we going to cope with this? How are we going to rectify it? The national average is 20% immigrants. In Newfoundland, it's 3%. Again, how do you plan to rectify that? And these are questions I ask myself. International students today, they're 3,000, and we've accepted 2,000 immigrants. That's 50% more than 5 years ago. Again, 43% of organizations reported labor skills shortages, and 60% of organizations receive applications for international students and newcomers. Yet, 48% of them actually hire these students. So these facts are out there, and we don't have to make them up and convince people that Canada, and especially Newfoundland, we need people to come here. The Genesis Center at MUN, they're there to help train and teach folks in starting new businesses. There's a study shown that there are more newcomers and international students, are starting new businesses, and international students are 6 times more likely to start a new business. In the last year alone, we've had 6 brand new international restaurants in our city. So for me, I have certainly seen a change in the way I see Canada and in the way I see Newfoundland. And I feel very proud because what I am bringing to Newfoundland, I feel it goes with all the studies that we're showing here. And again, Dr. Tony Fang went on to say that Newfoundland has the oldest population and the most aging population. The national average is 40 years. Newfoundland is 46 years. So let's ask ourselves, how do we plan to deal with the stigma of racism? Are we going to continue to, as David said earlier, go on someone's driveway, ring their doorbell, and bawl at them and tell them to go back to where you come from? Well, I would like to ask you, how do you plan to deal with racism when we have an aging population, the oldest population, and we are below the national average in every category? So intercultural diversity is certainly needed in our province. And if we bring only 1,000 more immigrants or newcomers, the government coffers will increase by 40 million. So we are bringing so much to the province and to the country. The benefits that we will get from the public services out there, because most newcomers are younger, we wouldn't access them until decades later. And the immigrants, as I said, are younger, so they're healthier, less trained on the system. We're not taking over jobs. It has shown that the jobs are advertised, and if they are not filled, then we reach out to folks. So again, ask yourself, folks, how do you plan to address this problem, knowing these facts about this great, big, beautiful, friendly province we're living in? And I hope to be a part of the change and to bring what I can about Caribbean culture, Caribbean peoples, and what we have to offer, myself included, to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you so much. Those were some interesting facts, and we had some interesting comments come up in the chat room, and very valid points. Thank you so much. Because we're running a little short of time, I'm going to ask one final question to all of the panelists, and then I'll go in the same order as before. What does an anti-racist NL look like for you? So, what does an anti-racist NL look like for you, David? I'm going to start with you.
If I go back to the interview that I did with NTV back in August last year, or in September 1, my belief is that for the most part, Newfoundlanders, and I think I use the number 99.1%. So it's a number, it could be 96, 97, 90, I'm not really sure, but it's a very high percentage. Newfoundlanders are not racist. I mean, I experienced it last year on a couple of occasions, but I think last year, as we all know, was a very unusual year. But so for me, I think we need to continue what we're doing. I mean, if I make reference to Quidi Vidi Brewery, we've been in that business now for 25 years. And I cannot recall over that 25-year period one racist incident or someone saying, well, I'm not going to drink Quidi Vidi beer because it's Asian owned or Chinese owned or what have you. And I've seen no evidence of that. But you know, that letter you made reference to earlier, the Black Students Association, Moran University receiving, you know, that awful letter. I mean, that shouldn't be happening in this day and age. So I think it's good that we're making an issue of it and making everybody more aware, because I mean, you just got to look south of the border. We do not want to go in that direction. So for me, I think we just need to improve on what we have here and just be cognizant of and tolerant of all the different religions and, you know, races and, you know, and whatever your gender orientation might be. So just keep doing what we're doing, but just be a little more respectful of people around you. And that's all I can say.
Definitely. You know, and I was one of those people, like, because I'm from Toronto, and you know, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. I think that a lot of times when people like coming to Newfoundland, and of course diversity and is growing in Newfoundland than when I came here I visited here 15 years ago. So a lot of times when people are staring or looking at you, it's not always that they are racist. It's not always, it's just that, you know, it's different, it's changing. And so they're looking. So yes, some people have experiences, but again, I agree with you on that, David. It's not always about racism here in Newfoundland for the population of the people. I will go to you next, Doctor. How would you answer that question? What does an anti-racist NL look like for you?
Well, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. There are so many things that can be said on personal and systemic levels. First of all, I want to remind myself and everybody on this call that to me, racism is actually a deeper reflection of a moral ill. This self-entitlement of certain people to believe that, you know, they are superior to others just because of their race, something that has not been chosen by themselves, is deeply problematic on a moral level. So it's immoral to be racist. And also there are so many things, and that requires every individual to engage in a very sincere self-reflection on themselves to identify, you know, why and how they are being racist, you know. And there are also, of course, many things that has to be done on a systemic level. And I believe that as racialized folks, we have done and continue to do more than our fair share in this journey. We reflected, collaborated, advocated to bring in much needed changes in our province. For instance, Anti-Racism Coalition NL and Addressing Islamophobia in NL are two giants that come to my mind for their tireless, consistent, and inclusive work, for making our province truly anti-racist. And they already generated an extensive basis of knowledge and skills. They are generously sharing them with everybody, including policymakers at municipal, federal, and provincial levels. But my experience is that there is no such a problem of as like lack of knowledge or activism. Instead, we have a serious lack of political will and action. And again, on the basis of my community work, I can tell that municipal leaders have been more responsive to our recommendations so far. For instance, the Inclusion Advisory Committee of the City of St. John's now has a new member to bring an exclusively anti-racism lens and agenda to the work of the City of St. John's. On the other hand, I know that addressing Islamophobia in NL, they have done extensive work, community consultations, and produced very clear recommendations for the provincial government. They shared their recommendations with the provincial government ministers, but so far they didn't hear back from them. Years are passed and they didn't hear back from them. Yeah, I mean, there is that lack of political will for action is one of the most acute problems that we are facing. But still, as citizens, as individuals, this shouldn't stop us from individually engaging in anti-racist work, which starts with sincere self-reflection on how we can become anti-racist. And I will also copy the recommendations of the Addressing Islamophobia in NL, in the chat box for those of you who might be interested to learn more about what needs to be done to make our province as a truly anti-racist place where everybody feels like they belong and respected for who they are.
Thank you, Doctor. Robert, how about you?
Well, yeah.
So, like, what? I know, and I think about your story, and it's each person has their own unusual story, and for yours, all that you've shared with us, and now where you are at this time, at this space and time in life, what would you say is still necessary to be done, and what do you think it would look like in NL if all what you're saying, what you're trying to accomplish, comes to pass?
The first thing that I would say is that I've spent most of my effort over the last 10 years trying to get the colonizers out of my brain. And I think that that's the first thing that we all need to do because of how deeply steeped the racism and systemic oppression that they've created through so-called Canada and so-called Newfoundland and Labrador, in the way that it presents in our police, in the way that they disproportionately hurt and murder Black and brown bodies, in the way that our prison systems deeply impact those same populations and need to be abolished for everybody. It's not just for racialized people, but especially for racialized people, that we need to abolish prisons. And I also want to caution us on this idea that that racism isn't as overt here in Newfoundland and Labrador, because it absolutely is still and it is playing out. And at least for my experience, as an Indigenous person, is the way that the state really gaslights us into believing that racism isn't a thing anymore, or that there's nothing left to be done, and that we are, because our neighbor to the south is somehow is terrible on a lot of issues, that somehow gives us a pass on our own terrible track records. We talk about the states, we talk about Ayse and kids in cages, and yes, Ayse is abhorrent and we need to abolish Ayse, but we also have to recognize how Canada uses to continue their neighbors' terrible track record on racism as a way to cover up their own. The racism is blatant and overt when we talk about kids in cages, but in Canada, we talk about children in care. They use peaceful language while continuing violent actions against Indigenous peoples. And I think that this is especially well demonstrated when you consider the fact that in First Nations kids are still currently in this moment in legal battles with the federal government to actually be able to have any form of recourse on the harms that have been done to them. There are at least nine non-compliance injunctions against the government of Canada because they've refused to provide equal service to First Nations kids in modern day. This is happening right now. And this is because they refuse to actually implement the Jordan's principle. And there's been $0 paid to kids who've been in foster care. And we still have not actually meaningfully addressed the harms of the 60 scoop and the intergenerational trauma that has actually been that has led us to this moment. So I want to, when we're thinking about racism and the way that the people around us present, it's not a fixed state of identity. It's a learned behavior and is demonstrated through ongoing actions or a lack of actions that are also steeped in systemic racism. So it's difficult when you're thinking through that like how someone can present as they're friendly enough with you, but the institutions that they're steeped in and the things that they were either taught or not taught in our school systems led them to this moment as well. Because I do find it especially poignant that I grew up in an education system on my own land as a Mi'kmaq person and was not taught in that same school system that we even existed, and was instead taught stereotypes and harmful tropes that we had inflicted harm on other peoples, that we were savages, we were so many other problems. So one thought that so that demonstration of action, Canada still has failed to meaningfully implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's that have been the 94 calls to justice that have been out since 2015. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Canada adopted in 2016, Canada has failed to meaningfully implement, and still actually it forms continues ongoing genocide and environmental racism against Indigenous peoples. So I want to highlight that on March 29th and 30th, there's a Silent No More International Summit of the Americas on violence against Indigenous women, which I'm also now linking in the chat for y'all. Because the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Inquiry Report I think 200 and something odd calls for justice have also not been meaningfully implemented. And I know I'm getting very fired up right now because I'm just thinking through all of the 7 generations of harm that have been done to Indigenous peoples and to racialized peoples, and that if we don't take action now, that we've got to start somewhere to heal for the 7 generations to come.
We need you to be fired up, Robert, because it's the passion that will make changes happen. So we love it. And I could listen to you all day, to be honest.
And the last sentence, the last thought I want to leave people with, and it's borrowed from Red Nation and the Red Deal, which is coming out in April, which I encourage you all to read, is that no one is illegal on stolen land except those who stole it.
Ah, I like that. Well said. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarojini, you're last but not least. What does an anti-racist NL look like to you?
Well, first I have to say Robert's passion and fire is certainly infectious.
Very.
I share a lot of what he's saying. I empathize with him in a very good way. I've experienced a lot of the same things. Just on a quick side note, my parents had many businesses back in Guyana, but as I mentioned, economic and political tensions and turmoil literally forced us out. We came here. That couldn't carry on things on the wide scale as he did. So we did open a smaller business, and this was in the province of Saskatchewan now, and this is back in the late 70s, early 80s, and white folks in the area would not send their kids to the store. They would prevent them because the previous owners were white Saskatchewanites. And they would literally tell their children not to come into the store. And they would tell them things like, where we came from, we wore leaves in our bodies. And these are things to put these ideas in people's minds, what we're all about. Mm-hmm. Now, thankfully, my parents came here with one goal in mind. We will do what it takes to build a new life. And we heard it, but we just had to push it aside and move on. And I will tell you, within 5 years, my parents pay it off with their properties, and move into a wealthier area in just 5 years. So I want to say to those folks, good riddance. Not in a bad way, but you know what? You cannot take these things to heart.
Mhm.
That's what I want to tell people. And I listen to a lot of podcasts as a radio host. It's my life. I drive my family crazy. Podcasts and music, they all tell me, turn it down, Mom. But I've been listening to Bishop T.D. Jakes, a non-denominational pastor, I think in Dallas, and he has millions of followers. And he said it right. And I want to steal his words, and there are his words. He said, racism is our grandfather's problem, but we are still dealing with it. He goes on to say, we can circle the ideology as opposed to the individual when we open our doors to a lot of people from a lot of different colors. And he goes on to say, let us come together, black, white, brown, yellow, indigenous, people of affluence and influence. And I would like to bring that to our big little province of Newfoundland. I think, from my perspective, having lived in 3 provinces, 6 cities, and traveled all over Canada, coast to coast, different times of my life, as well as in the United States, all the way from Ontario, driving to Florida and Georgia, back again, the Eastern Seaboard. And I can tell you, we have work to do. I love Newfoundland. It's a beautiful island, but we have to do work. We can't just say, oh, come here. And then when we come, we're faced with so many challenges that I experienced 30 years ago. Like I was stunned by some of the things, I would hear or I was hearing at the time when I first came here. I think people should listen with intent and action. If you want to know about me, one of the things I always used to get when I first came is, oh my God, I could never say your name. Do you have a nickname? And I smiled very nicely and said, you know what? I'll say it for you. But surprisingly, I didn't take it personally or take offense because I had gone through that before. And I was like, well, let's do it again. And by the time the month came, after 4 weeks, everyone in the workplace could say my name. And I was so proud, and I would say to them, I'm so proud of you guys, listen to you, and we joke about it, right? Again, don't judge a book by its covers. I've met many talented, educated, beautiful international kids that speak 3, 4, and 5 languages. English may not be their first language.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that you have to judge someone based on their command for English and say, well, will you be a good employee? Can you do the work? Are you capable? It could be they may not be able to do the work because of cultural values and issues which you beautiful folks of the ANC are teaching us to deal with, like microaggression. Oh, I love your brown skin and all of that. I mean, I don't like the term exotic anymore. I used to like it in my teens when I want to go somewhere exotic. Please do not use that to me. I actually take offense to that because and not because I'm chastising someone, it's because the context in which the word is used, it's to me, it connotates negative values. Oh, look at you. You're so exotic. You're different. Yes, I'm different, but you can't say that and then continue with racist rhetoric. In my opinion, that has got to stop. Just a few years ago, people were saying, why are these people coming to Newfoundland and take away jobs? Well, I just reiterated to you by Dr. Tony Fang from the Department of Economics at MUN, the stats on what is happening right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we need to work on ourselves first. Like they always say, make your own bed before you go into someone else's house and make theirs. And I would like to use that in the truest sense. Look at yourselves before you start pointing fingers. And if we want newcomers to come here and stay, retention is the key. As I said, this is one of the most beautiful places I've lived in Canada and visited. My husband and I, we've traveled across the country, United States and Canada, and I say that with sincerity and with love. We can do so much as a people besides being known as friendly. And I just want to leave you a couple words. My favorite guest and podcast, Bishop T.G. Jakes, he said, every time you hear, keep the faith, you have an operation, keep the faith, the bus broke down, keep the faith, everything is keep the faith. Well, I want to use that and say, guys, keep the faith, but be sincere. Let us do it from our hearts. This land, as Robert said at the beginning, it is not our land. And who wants to say, go back to where you come from? I would like to turn that back on to them and say, and where will you go? Because this is not any of our lands. So we need to be respectful. Be respectful who owns the land, who belongs here. And as the Indigenous and Aboriginal folks say, we are all visitors. Let's share the land and be respectful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarojini. And with that, we've run out of time. I want to thank you all, the panelists, for coming today, joining us, and sharing the wealth of knowledge that you all possess. So on behalf of Association for New Canadians, thank you very much. And I want to wish everyone a wonderful multicultural month, as this month is Multicultural Month in Newfoundland. Thank you all so much. You shared wonderful stories. And I'm sure that just from the comments that we were getting from the chat box, that people are relating to everything that you have all said and can feel it to their core. So again, thank you all so much from the Association for New Canadians. Thank you.